Boba sit. The last thing a 10-year-old boy should ever do is walk toward a man like that. 6 foot 2, 230 pounds of weathered leather and controlled silence. A skull and compass patch above his heart. Eyes the color of old asphalt, scanning everything, trusting nothing. The kind of man that made gas station attendants quietly reach beneath the counter. The kind of man that made whole parking lots rearrange themselves. Noah Mercer walked straight toward him. Not because he was brave, not because he was stupid, because sewn onto the back of that worn leather vest, between road dust and old grease and 100,000 miles of American highway, was a patch his dead father used to wear in photographs his mother thought she had hidden well enough. He hadn't said a word yet, but when he did, it would crack something open that 4 years of silence had sealed shut. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because stories like this one don't come through twice. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this road reaches. Now let's go back to that gas station, back to the boy, back to everything that was about to change. The Sunoco station on Route 9 had been losing the fight against winter since October. One of the two overhead lights had blown out 3 weeks ago, and nobody had bothered replacing it. The remaining fluorescent tube buzzed and flickered with the particular desperation of something that knows it's dying but hasn't figured out how to stop yet. The air smelled like old gasoline and the kind of cold that gets into your joints and stays there. A hand-lettered sign taped to the door read, "Cash only. No exceptions," curling at the corners from humidity. Beneath it, another sign, "No loitering." Beneath that, someone had written in blue marker, "This means you." Claire Mercer stood at the register with $23.47 in her hand and a look on her face that she had perfected over 4 years of practicing survival. The look said, "I am fine." The look said, "I am not embarrassed." The look said absolutely nothing about the hospital shift she had just worked, the 11 hours on her feet, the brake noise the car had been making since Tuesday, or the fact that $23.47 was not enough to cover what was already in the handbasket beside her sneakers. The kid behind the counter, 19, maybe 20, with a vape pen tucked behind his ear, was watching his phone and didn't look up. "That's going to be $26.80, he said. Claire set the basket on the counter and started pulling items out. A box of pasta, a can of tomatoes. She put those back. She kept the pasta, kept the milk, kept the ibuprofen, because her back had been doing something since September that she hadn't had time to have looked at. She did the math 3 times in her head before she stopped. "Just these," she said. "Okay," he said, still on his phone. She didn't say anything else. She had gotten very good at not saying anything else. Outside, beyond the dirty glass of the convenience store window, her son Noah was sitting on the concrete barrier at the edge of the parking lot. He was wearing his blue-down jacket, the one with the broken zipper he'd gotten from the school clothes closet in September, and he was doing what he always did when she left him outside to wait. He was watching the road. Not like a kid watching for something exciting, like a kid watching for something specific, like a kid who had decided, somewhere in the slow-moving grief of the past 4 years, that if he watched long enough, the right pair of headlights might eventually come from the right direction. The sound arrived before the light did. It came from the south end of Route 9, low and even, a vibration more felt in the chest than heard in the ears. A Harley-Davidson engine running at highway speed dropping down to a roll. Then another one, running a half beat behind it in the way that riders fall into without thinking about it, the way long roadmen move together after years of learning each other's instincts. The kind of sound that hit the parking lot asphalt and bounced back up through the concrete barrier and into Noah's sneakers before either bike had cleared the tree line. He turned toward the sound before he'd made a decision to turn. The first bike came in slow. A Road King, matte black, running lights only, chrome stripped off the custom exhaust to keep the silhouette clean. The rider was enormous, not in the showy way, in the quiet way. The way that men who have been through real things sometimes get, like the weight of what they've carried has compacted itself into bone and muscle and something behind the eyes that doesn't go away. Han wore a worn leather cut over a dark hoodie, the sleeves pushed to the elbows despite the cold, forearms cross-hatched with old scars that had long since lost their stories. The back of the cut said Iron Covenant MC in faded block letters, and below the name, the skull and compass chapter patch that Noah had seen in the photographs. The second rider was smaller, leaner, coming in on a Sportster that looked like it had been rebuilt from salvage parts and sheer stubbornness. He had a gray beard trimmed short and a limp in the way he dismounted, something that hadn't healed right and never would. The big man cut the engine. The silence after a Harley goes quiet is its own kind of loud. He pulled off his helmet and hung it from the handlebars with the ease of 10,000 identical gestures. He didn't scan the parking lot the way nervous men do. He scanned it the way careful men do. Once, slow, cataloging, and then done. His eyes moved across the gas pumps, the broken light, the hand-lettered signs, the kid inside on his phone, and then they landed on Noah. Noah was staring at the back of his vest. The man turned to face him, and Noah got a look at the front of the cut. Road name above the left breast pocket, Gideon. Below it, SGT, at arms. Below that, a small worn rectangle of embroidered text that was too faded to read from where Noah was sitting. But Noah already knew what it said because he had read it off a photograph approximately 400 times. Ride with purpose or don't ride at all. His father's words, his father's patch. On a man he had never seen before in his life. Noah got off the concrete barrier. Noah. He said it quietly, not a command, more like a warning he was giving himself. But his sneakers were already moving. Gideon Voss watched the kid cross the parking lot without expression. When you had spent 17 years moving through the kind of spaces that men like Gideon moved through, you learned to tell the difference between someone walking toward you with bad intent and someone walking toward you because they had run out of other options. This kid was the second kind. Small for 10, maybe, with his mother's eyes and a jaw that would sharpen into something harder in about 6 years. And something in the way he moved that Gideon recognized without wanting to. He'd seen that walk before, on a man who'd been dead 4 years now. The kid stopped about 3 feet away. That was smart. Close enough to talk, far enough to run, and the calculation of it was unconscious, instinctive, the kind of spacing a child learns when the world has already taught it that some conversations go wrong without warning. "Are you Iron Covenant?" Noah said. Gideon studied him for one long moment. "Depends on who's asking." "My dad was," Noah said. "Caleb Mercer. He rode with you." The name hit the cold air and just stayed there. Whatever Gideon Voss had braced himself for, a threat, a shakedown, a journalist, a cop working a case that should have stayed closed. It was not this. It was not 10 years old and a broken jacket zipper, and a face that was absolutely, unmistakably, without a shadow of a doubt, the face of a dead man at half scale. Behind him, the gray-bearded rider had gone very still. Gideon crouched down. Not in the condescending way adults crouch to talk to children, in the way that men who've been through combat learn to drop to eye level when the stakes are real. His knees popped on the way down. His eyes, when they were level with Noah's, were the color of old highway, and they were doing something complicated. "How old are you?" Gideon said. 10, Noah said. "I'll be 11 in March." "You remember your father?" "Some," Noah said. "Mom doesn't talk about him much. I found the pictures." "What pictures?" "In the box under her bed, with the patches. She doesn't know I know about the box." Gideon was quiet for so long that the fluorescent light above finished one of its longer spasms and settled back to its dull, buzzing glow. The gray-bearded man behind him made a sound, low, something that wasn't quite a word, and Gideon held up 2 fingers without turning around, the kind of gesture that means wait in a language that doesn't need to be taught. "Your name's Noah," Gideon said. "Yes, sir." "Caleb named you." Noah blinked. "He did?" "Said if he ever had a son, he was going to name him after the one who built the boat. Said any man worth trusting builds something that outlasts the storm." He paused. "I'm not sure if that's deep or just something Caleb said when he'd had too much coffee. He said a lot of things like that." For the first time in the entire conversation, the first time in quite possibly months, Noah Mercer smiled. It was small and brief and immediately covered up, the way children hide things that matter too much. But Gideon caught it and filed it somewhere behind his eyes and did not mention it. "Noah." The voice came from behind him, sharp and frightened and tired in equal measure. Claire Mercer had come through the convenience store door with a plastic bag in one hand and her car keys arranged between the knuckles of the other, The way women learn to carry keys when they've spent enough years walking through parking lots alone at night. Her eyes took in Gideon, the size, the cut, the road name, the general category of danger. And then they took in the second rider, and then they took in the bike, and then they went back to her son, who was standing 3 feet from a man who looked like the kind of thing her nightmares had been assembling out of spare parts for 4 years. "Step away from him," she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced keeping her voice even. Noah turned. "Mom! Now, Noah!" Gideon rose slowly. He kept his hands visible, open, away from his sides, with the particular practiced care of a man who had been in enough situations to know that visible hands are the first sentence in a conversation about trust. He didn't move toward her. He didn't move at all. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "my name's Gideon Voss. I rode with your husband." The keys between her knuckles tightened. "I know what club he rode with." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you know why we don't have conversations like this." "I know why you think that." The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere on Route 9, a semi downshifted through the dark, the sound of it rolling past like something that didn't belong to this moment, on its way to somewhere else, indifferent to the 3 people standing in a dying parking lot with 4 years of silence compressed between them like a spring. "Noah, get in the car," Claire said. "Mom, he knew Dad." "Car." Noah looked at Gideon. Gideon looked back at him. The gray-bearded man behind had still not moved from where he was standing beside his Sportster, and there was something in his posture, not aggression, not tension, but a kind of careful stillness, like a man holding himself back from something he has a lot of practice holding himself back from. Noah walked to the car. He walked slowly. He kept his eyes on Gideon for as long as he could before the angle stopped working. He got into the passenger seat. He did not close the door all the way. Claire Mercer looked at Gideon Voss across the empty space of the parking lot, and her expression did something complicated. It had started as fear, clean, practiced, 4 years honed. And it was still fear, but there was something else underneath it now, something that recognized things it had spent a long time trying not to recognize. The patch, the chapter, the road name. Caleb had talked about a Gideon once, only once, late at night when he thought she was already asleep, on the phone, and she had only caught pieces. Gideon handled it. Gideon was there. I don't know what I would have done without Gideon on that bridge. She had never asked him which bridge. She should have asked him which bridge. "He found the photographs," she said. Not quite to Gideon. Not quite to herself. "Kids find things," Gideon said, "especially the ones looking." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at the plastic bag in her hand. Pasta, milk, ibuprofen. And the calculation that crossed her face was the same one she had done at the register, except the numbers were different now, and the thing she couldn't afford was something other than groceries. "Don't come looking for us," she said. "I wasn't looking for you," Gideon said. "This is just the road I take." She got in the car. The engine started. It took 2 tries, the battery had been slow since September, and the headlights came on and swept the parking lot as she reversed. In the passenger seat, Noah had his face turned toward the window, and for just a moment, as the light swung past, Gideon could see the boy's expression clearly. It was not the expression of a child who had been frightened. It was the expression of someone who had just found something they had been looking for without knowing they were looking. That expression was going to cost somebody something. Gideon watched the car reach the road. He watched the taillights until Route 9 bent south and took them away. Then he straightened and turned around, and the gray-bearded man, whose road name was Dutch, worn in cracked white lettering above the same chapter patch, was looking at him with an expression that had history written all over it. "That's Caleb's boy," Dutch said. "Yeah. She doesn't want anything to do with us. She made that clear. So we leave it alone." Gideon pulled on his helmet and didn't answer. Dutch had ridden enough miles with Gideon Voss to know that when Gideon Voss didn't answer a question about whether they should leave something alone, the answer was not yes. "She's right about what happened," Dutch said. "Whatever she thinks of us, she's not wrong about what that life cost him." "No," Gideon agreed. "She's not." "Then why are you looking at that road like that?" Gideon settled onto the Road King. His hands found the grips. His thumb found the starter. In the cold air, his exhale came out white. "Because the kid knew his father's words," Gideon said. Verbatim. Off a patch. He memorized a dead man's philosophy out of photographs he was never supposed to find. He let the engine turn over once, twice. It caught and settled into its low, patient rumble. That boy's been trying to understand something about his father for 4 years, and nobody has given him a single piece of it. Dutch was quiet. That's not a kid who's moving on, Gideon said. That's a kid who's waiting. He pulled out of the Sunoco station and turned south on Route 9, and Dutch followed him, and the two sets of taillights went red in the dark and then gone. Inside the car, 8 miles down the same road, Noah Mercer sat with his knees pressed together and his hands flat on his thighs and said nothing. Claire drove with both hands on the wheel and her jaw tight and the ibuprofen in the bag on the back seat untouched. The heater made a rattling noise that neither of them commented on. The road was empty and long and lit only by the Civic's headlights, which were not very strong. After 11 minutes of silence, Noah said, "He knew my name." Claire's hands tightened on the wheel. "Before I told him," Noah said. "He looked at me and he already knew who I was." She didn't answer. "Mom." "Not now." "When?" She didn't answer that either, and the car kept moving through the dark, and somewhere behind them on Route 9, a pair of Harley engines were still running, still rolling, still going in the same direction they were going, and Claire Mercer gripped the steering wheel and stared straight ahead and tried very hard not to think about what it meant that after 4 years of silence, the road had finally sent someone back. She had almost convinced herself it was nothing by the time she saw the lights in the rearview mirror. 2 bikes, running lights only, keeping their distance, 50 yards back, maybe 60. Not gaining, not dropping back. Just there, steady in the dark, following the same road, because it was the same road, because there was only one road, because that was what she had to believe right now. Noah saw them too. He turned in his seat and looked through the rear window, and when he turned back around, his expression was the one she had been dreading since the parking lot, the one that meant something had already settled in him, something that wasn't going to be argued out of place, something that had found a corner of him that was empty and cold and the exact right size and had moved in quietly while she wasn't watching. "Mom," he said. "Who's Gideon?" And Claire Mercer opened her mouth to say no one, to say nobody, to say the thing she had been saying for 4 years every time a question had edges sharp enough to cut something she needed to keep intact. And the car hit the patch of black ice at the base of the Route 9 hill. The ice was a thin sheet, maybe 3 inches wide, invisible under the Civic's headlights until the front left tire found it at 42 miles per hour. Claire felt the wheel go loose in her hands, not all the way loose, not the full terrifying surrender of a car that has decided to go somewhere on its own, but that partial disconnect, that half second where the physics of the situation outrank every decision a human being can make. Her foot came off the accelerator the way her body had been trained. No brake, no jerk, just ease, breathe, let the tires find something. And the Civic fishtailed maybe 8 inches left before the asphalt texture came back and the front end straightened. 8 inches, that was all. But Noah's hands had come up and gripped the dashboard, and Claire's heart was doing something in her chest that she would not describe as panic, because she had spent 4 years reclassifying panic as manageable response, and the ibuprofen in the bag on the back seat slid sideways and hit the door panel with a small plastic rattle that somehow seemed very loud. She pulled the car to the shoulder, put it in park, left the engine running because the heater was the only thing standing between them and the cold that was pressing against the windows from every direction. She sat there for a moment with both hands still on the wheel. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah," Noah said. His voice was steady in the way children's voices get steady when they're frightened and they know it and they don't want to be. She could see them in the mirror. The 2 bikes had stopped, not right behind her. They had pulled to the opposite shoulder, 40 yards back, and neither engine was running now. Just 2 men sitting on cold asphalt in the dark, watching, waiting, not coming forward, not leaving either. Claire reached into the back seat and got the ibuprofen. She opened it without looking, shook 2 into her palm, swallowed them dry. Then she put the car back in drive and pulled onto Route 9 and drove home, and in the rearview mirror the 2 lights came back on and followed at the same distance they had maintained before. Steady, patient, unarguable. She did not look in the mirror again for the rest of the drive. She didn't need to. She could feel them back there, the way you feel weather coming before you can name it. The apartment was on the third floor of a building that had been built in 1987 and last renovated sometime before Noah was born. The elevator had a handwritten out-of-order sign that had been there so long it had acquired its own layer of grime. Claire carried the groceries up the stairs with one hand and kept the other on the railing and didn't make a sound about her back. And Noah walked ahead of her and held the apartment door and didn't make a sound about the fact that he was still watching the parking lot through the hallway window when she got the key in the lock. "Coat?" Claire said. He hung it up. She put the pasta on the stove. She didn't have anything to add to it except the can of tomatoes and some salt, but she made it the way her mother had taught her. Patient, low heat, let the salt do the work, and the smell of it moved through the small apartment and did what good cooking always does, which is to make whatever walls exist between people slightly thinner for a few minutes. Noah sat at the kitchen table and did homework. Math. He was good at it. Caleb had been good at it too, which was something Claire had noticed and refused to say out loud. She stirred the sauce. She listened to the pencil moving on paper. She thought about two motorcycles sitting on the shoulder of a dark road and the fact that they had not followed her into the parking lot of her building. They had passed the entrance and kept going south, engine sounds fading, and then the night was quiet again. Good, she had thought. Good. But that was the problem with men like that. They didn't need to follow you home. They already knew where home was. Men who had been through what those men had been through. Men who moved through the world the way Caleb had moved through the world, with that particular alertness that she'd once found comforting and later found terrifying. Those men could find anything they decided needed finding. She poured the pasta. They ate without the television on. That was a new thing. 3 months ago, she had started turning it off at dinner because she'd read somewhere that it was better for children to have quiet meals. And it was better, except that the quiet had a way of filling itself up with things that television would have covered. Things like the specific sound of a 10-year-old boy working himself up to a question he already knew the answer to. "Were they following us?" Noah said. "No," Claire said. "They were going the same direction the whole way home. Route 9 goes south. Lots of people go south on Route 9. Noah twirled pasta on his fork with the deliberate patience of someone who has decided that patience is the most effective tool available to him. He'd learned that. She didn't know if he'd learned it from her or if it had come in the same package as Caleb's jawline and Caleb's way of going still when something mattered. "He knew my name," Noah said again. "You told him your name at the gas station." "Before. He looked at me and he knew. He said Dad named me. He said—" Noah stopped, put down the fork. "He knew the reason. He knew why Dad picked that name. You never told me that." Claire set down her own fork very carefully. "He said Dad said something about building something that outlasts the storm," Noah continued. "Is that true? Did he say that?" She had heard Caleb say that, twice. Once when they were 26 and sitting on the roof of his old apartment in the summer, and once in the hospital in the last week when everything was abbreviated and the words that came out were the ones that had survived everything else being burned away. She had thought it was something he said to her. She had thought those words belonged to their marriage, to the space between two people who were trying to build something in the middle of all the things that were trying to tear it down. She had not known he said it to the men he rode with. "Mom, eat your dinner, Noah." "Mom, I'm not going to stop asking." "I know you're not." "So why won't you just—" "Because I don't know what they want." The words came out harder than she meant them to, and she saw him flinch, not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes that she knew from 4 years of watching him navigate things a 10-year-old should not have to navigate. She exhaled. "I don't know what they want," she said again, quieter. "And until I know that, I need you to trust me." "I trust you," Noah said. "I just don't think you know everything." She couldn't argue with that. It was the truest thing he had said all evening. Wopo. Gideon Voss lived alone in a house at the end of a gravel road that had no name, 7 miles east of Route 9, in a township that had never quite decided what it wanted to be. The house was small and clean in the way that men who have lived in disorder sometimes make their immediate space, a reaction, a boundary, a declaration that at least this one corner of the world would be controlled. The garage attached to it was a different story. The garage was alive in the way that workshops are alive, with the clutter of ongoing things, tools hung in specific places that were specific because of specific lessons, a rolling workbench that had been rebuilt twice, a chain hoist bolted to a ceiling beam that could lift 400 pounds without complaint. There was a Road King in the garage and a parts bike beside it, and a corkboard on the eastern wall with photographs pinned to it, some of them very old. Dutch sat at the workbench with a mug of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Gideon stood in the doorway between the garage and the house with his cut off and hanging from a hook on the wall, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was looking at the corkboard. "You're going to do something," Dutch said. "I haven't decided anything." "You rode south on Route 9. It's a road." "Gideon." Dutch set down the cold coffee. He had a way of saying names that made them sound like full sentences. "I watched you on that ice patch. You had the phone out. I was watching to make sure they made it." "And if they hadn't?" Gideon didn't answer. Dutch pulled the collar of his jacket up. The garage was cold. Gideon kept the heater low. He always had, some habit from the years when fuel was money, and money was something you measured in miles, always in miles. "The boy is not our responsibility," Dutch said. "No. Claire Mercer wants nothing to do with the club. I know that. Caleb's been dead 4 years. We did the right things. We sent the money. We stayed away like she asked." "We sent money," Gideon said. "She sent it back." A beat of silence. "All of it," Dutch said. "Every envelope. Took about a month each time. She'd cash it, take out what she needed for that month, money order it back to the P.O. box." Gideon moved to the workbench. He picked up a brake line fitting, turned it in his fingers, set it back down. 3 times. "Then she stopped getting the envelopes because I stopped sending them, because I understood what she was telling me. That she didn't want the club's money. That she didn't want us to be able to tell ourselves we'd done enough." He paused. "She's been at this alone for 4 years, Dutch. Hospital shifts, 3rd floor walk-up, 11-year-old car with a bad battery. She sent back every dollar we sent because taking the money would have meant we were square." Dutch was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind was doing something to the tree line that sounded like the ocean very far away. The coffee mug sat between his hands and he wasn't looking at it. "That's not fair to her," Dutch said finally. "What she's doing with the money, that's not—" "It's completely fair," Gideon said. "We were there when Caleb made the choices that led to that road. We could have stopped it. I could have stopped it." He said that last part without drama, without the particular weight that men use when they want credit for their guilt. He said it the way you state coordinates. The way you say that's the bridge. That's where it happened. I didn't, and I've been square with that. But the boy standing in a parking lot with his father's words memorized out of contraband photographs, that's something different. Different how? "He's not grieving," Gideon said. "He's waiting. There's a difference." Dutch pushed the cold coffee away. "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But you're going to do something." Gideon looked at the corkboard, at the photographs pinned there, some of them 15 years old, edges yellow, color gone flat. A group of men in front of bikes that were younger then, faces that still had the smoothness of men who had not yet accumulated what they were about to accumulate. Caleb Mercer was in 3 of them. In one, he was laughing. In one, he was looking at something off camera with an expression that Gideon had spent 4 years trying to decode. In the third, he had his arm around Dutch, and his chin was tipped up, and his eyes were closed, and he looked like a man who had just decided something and felt good about it. Gideon had taken that photograph. He remembered the moment exactly. He remembered what Caleb had said right before the shutter. "Whatever happens, these are the years I'll look back on. These are the ones that mattered." He'd said it like a man giving a toast. He'd said it like a man who had maybe already started to understand that time was something he was going to have less of than he expected. "I'm going to do something," Gideon confirmed. Dutch picked up his jacket. "Then I'm going to need more coffee." The call came 4 days later. Wednesday morning, 7:43, Claire was putting on her second layer for the walk to the bus stop because the Civic's battery had finally made good on its long-running threat and died in the parking lot overnight. She had the phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder. She was pulling on her second sock, and the voice on the other end was her building manager explaining that the leak in the ceiling of the apartment below hers had been traced to a slow seep in her bathroom floor, and the repair would require access on Friday from 8 to noon, and she would need to be present. Friday 8 to noon was a shift, an 8-hour shift, the first full one she'd been offered in 3 weeks, at a hospital 40 minutes away. She told the building manager she would figure it out. She said it calmly. She hung up and sat on the edge of the bed with one sock on and stared at the floor for 30 seconds. Then she put on the second sock and her coat and her scarf and her boots with the left buckle that didn't close properly anymore. And she picked up Noah's backpack and her own bag and said, "Let's go." And they went. The bus was 6 minutes late. It was cold at the stop. Properly cold. The kind that Route 9 knew how to deliver in November, with a wind off the fields to the north that had nothing to slow it down. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders up around his ears and didn't complain. He had gotten very good at not complaining. That worried her sometimes, the competence of his endurance. Children were not supposed to be that good at enduring things. "Mrs. Kowalski can't do Friday," he said. "I know." "What about the Garcias?" "They have the baby." He was quiet for a moment. "I can stay by myself." "You're 10, almost 11. No." The bus came. They got on. It smelled like wet coats and old coffee and something chemical from the cleaning solution they used on the seats. Noah found a window seat. Claire stood holding the overhead rail, her bag on her shoulder, and she watched the town go by through the rain-streaked glass. And she thought about Friday and the shift and the bathroom floor and the 40-minute bus ride to the hospital, because the Civic was dead and a battery replacement was $180, and she had been awake since 4 a.m., doing the math on that repeatedly, and the math kept coming out the same way. She was still doing the math on the walk from the bus stop to the school when the motorcycle passed them, slow and clean, Road King matte black, going in the opposite direction. It didn't stop. It didn't slow beyond already slow. The rider turned his head once as he passed, and then he was gone around the corner, and Claire had her hand on Noah's shoulder before she had made a conscious decision to reach for him. Noah looked up at her. She let her hand drop. "Walk," she said. "Was that? Walk, please." She didn't know if it was Gideon or one of his people or a coincidence, and that was the problem. She had reached a point where she could not trust her own assessment of what was coincidence. She had been awake since 4 a.m. She was doing math that didn't balance. She was standing on a wet sidewalk outside her son's school on a Wednesday morning, trying to figure out how to be in two places on Friday, and wondering if the man who remembered her dead husband's words had just ridden past her block on purpose. She dropped Noah at the school door. He looked at her with Caleb's eyes. "Mom," he said, "you should call him. Go to school. He's not dangerous. Noah, Dad trusted him." She looked at her son for a moment, really looked, at the jacket with the broken zipper, at the backpack with the patched strap, at the face that had been trying to understand something unreachable for 4 years and had not stopped trying, would not stop trying, was constitutionally incapable of stopping because he was built from people who did not stop. "Your father," she said carefully, "trusted a lot of people he shouldn't have." Noah held her gaze. "And some he should have trusted more." She didn't have an answer for that. She went to the bus stop and waited in the cold. Gideon was in the middle of a brake line replacement on Dutch's Sportster when Dutch came into the garage with 2 mugs and a look on his face that meant someone had called. "Remy's in town," Dutch said. Gideon's hand stopped moving. Remy Call had been Iron Covenant's road captain for 6 years before everything fell apart. He was the kind of man who existed in the specific negative space of the word useful. Not good, not bad, but effective in the way that things with sharp edges are effective. He had left the chapter on terms that were never formally discussed, which was the worst kind of terms to leave anything on. He had also been in the car with Caleb the night before Caleb died. Not in the accident, not on the road. In the parking lot of a bar called Hendrix, 2 counties over, where several things had been said that were not said in front of Gideon, and one decision had been made, and the next morning Caleb had been on the wrong road at the wrong time, doing something he would not have been doing if that conversation had gone differently. Gideon knew this because Dutch had told him, 6 months after the fact. Sitting in this same garage at this same workbench, with the same cold that pressed through the same walls. He set down the brake line tool. "Where?" he said. "Stabler's. He came in last night, told Briggs he was just passing through." "Nobody passes through this county in November." "No," Dutch agreed. "They don't." Gideon wiped his hands on a shop rag. He was doing it slowly, methodically, knuckle by knuckle, The way he did everything when something was happening inside him that he was not going to let become something visible. Did he say anything about the boy? Dutch's expression shifted, just slightly. How would he know about the boy? Because if Remy is in town 4 days after I ran into Claire and Noah at a gas station on Route 9, that's not a coincidence I'm willing to be comfortable with. He threw the rag on the bench. Someone told him. Who knew? You and me and whoever was in Stabler's that night when I got back late. He pulled on his cut. Which one of them talks to Remy? It wasn't a question. Dutch knew it wasn't a question. He also knew that Gideon already had an answer in mind, was already running the list, was already at the bottom of it, and unhappy with what he found there. Gideon, Dutch said it carefully, I'm not going to do anything stupid. I didn't say stupid. I said, think about why he's here first, before you walk into Stabler's. I know why he's here. You think you know. Remy was carrying something about Caleb when he left, Gideon said. He's carried it 4 years. Whatever he said to Caleb in that parking lot, whatever happened between them that night, he knows the boy exists now, and Remy Call does not leave things alone that he thinks might come back at him. He went to the pegboard and took down his helmet. That makes Noah and Claire a problem I need to get ahead of. Dutch stood up. Then I'm coming. No, I need you to go sit outside that apartment building. Dutch looked at him. Not to do anything, Gideon said, just to be there, just to be visible. He paused. She needs to know the difference between a threat watching her and someone watching for threats watching her. Right now she can't tell the difference. I need her to start being able to. Dutch picked up his own helmet without argument. That was the thing about men who had ridden long enough together. The arguments that needed to happen had already happened, years ago, on roads in the dark, and what remained was a fluency that didn't require rehearsal. Gideon walked out of the garage. He sat on the Road King. He started the engine and felt it settle under him, that familiar vibration, the mechanical heartbeat that had been his steadiest companion through every ugly season of the last 17 years. He thought about Remy Call sitting in Stabler's. He thought about what Remy had said to Caleb in a parking lot that Gideon had not been in. He thought about a 10-year-old boy who had memorized a dead man's philosophy out of hidden photographs and walked straight across a gas station parking lot without hesitating. He pulled out of the gravel road and turned toward town, and the morning was cold and gray and completely indifferent to whatever was about to happen inside it, the way mornings always are. But Stabler's was a bar that served breakfast because it had learned that the same population that needed a bar at 11 p.m. also needed eggs at 7 a.m., and the economics of that insight had kept it alive through 3 recessions and 1 small fire. The breakfast crowd was thin on a Wednesday. A couple of county workers, a man in a feed company jacket reading something on his phone, a woman with a thermos who came in every morning and drank their coffee and supplemented it from her thermos with something that was not coffee. Remy Call was in the back booth. He was 51 years old, and he looked like 51 years that had been left outside in various kinds of weather. Gray at the temples, still dark everywhere else, thick through the shoulders in a way that had gone slightly to softness. The softness of a man who had stopped doing the things that kept it hard. He was wearing a jacket with no patches, which was its own kind of statement. He had a mug of coffee and a plate of eggs he wasn't eating, and his eyes were on the door when Gideon came through it. Neither man smiled. Gideon crossed the bar without stopping at the counter and slid into the booth across from Remy and put his helmet on the seat beside him and looked at the man. "Remy," he said. "Gideon." Remy wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "You look the same." "I'm not." "No," Remy agreed. "Neither am I." He looked down at the eggs. "I heard you ran into Claire 4 days ago. And the kid." "And the kid?" Remy nodded. Outside, a truck passed, and the windows rattled faintly in their frames. The woman with the thermos looked up, looked back down. The county workers were talking about something to do with road salt. "I need to tell you something about that night," Remy said. "Which part of the night?" Remy's jaw worked for a moment. He was one of those men who had a lot of practice presenting things, as though they had already made their peace with them, and not quite enough practice to make it look real up close. "The parking lot," he said, "before the road." "I know you two talked," Gideon said. "It was more than talked." The coffee maker behind the counter made a long hissing sound and then went quiet. Gideon waited. "I told him something," Remy said.
Something I should have told you first. Something I found out 3 days before and sat on because I hadn't decided what to do with it. And then I made the wrong decision at the wrong moment because I was angry. And Caleb was the kind of man who made you say things you hadn't finished thinking yet. What did you tell him? Gideon said. His voice was flat and level, the way surfaces are level, after you take a lot of care to make them that way. Remy looked at him. There was money, Remy said, moving through the chapter accounts. Before Caleb died, moving in a direction it wasn't supposed to move, in amounts that someone had been careful about. And I traced it far enough to find a name I recognized, and the name I found was one that connected back to Caleb. The room did not change. The county workers kept talking. The woman kept supplementing her coffee. The eggs on Remy's plate cooled. Say it plainly, Gideon said. Someone was using Caleb's access codes, Remy said, or Caleb was letting someone use them. I couldn't tell which. I still can't. And I told him that in the parking lot, I told him I had found it, and I needed to know which one it was, and he… Remy stopped. He didn't answer the way an innocent man answers. The silence between them was the particular silence of two people sitting on opposite sides of something that cannot be unsaid. You told a man something that could destroy his life and then let him drive away, Gideon said. I didn't think he would. You knew what state of mind he was in. You knew what that road meant to him when he was in that state. Gideon's hands were flat on the table. Not fists, just flat, with a care that was its own form of tension. And you sat on this for 4 years. Because he died, Remy said. Because once he was dead, there was nothing to do with it. The money had moved, the account was closed, the chapter absorbed the loss, and nobody asked the right questions because nobody wanted to know the answers. And I thought… He stopped again. I thought it was finished. Why are you here now? Because Caleb's son is 10 years old, Remy said, and the name I found connected to those account codes is not finished with the Mercer family. Gideon looked at him. The name I found, Remy said, is still operating, still moving money. And 4 days ago, someone in this county sent a message to a contact of his that said Caleb Mercer's kid had just been seen talking to Iron Covenant. The cold outside pressed against the windows. He knows the boy exists, Remy said, and he has reason to believe Caleb told the boy something, or left something, that connects back to what he was doing with those accounts. He exhaled. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is that he believes it. Gideon stood up. Give me the name, he said. Remy looked up at him. His face had the expression of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and has just set it down and is not yet sure if the relief is worth what he has just transferred to someone else. He said the name. Gideon picked up his helmet. He walked back through Stabler's without looking at the county workers or the woman or the man in the feed company jacket. He pushed through the door into the cold morning air. He had his phone out before he reached the bike, and Dutch picked up on the second ring. Stay where you are, Gideon said. Don't let her go anywhere without eyes on her. What happened? Caleb didn't just die on that road, Gideon said. He was pointed at it. He swung onto the Road King, and the man who pointed him is looking for his son. The name Remy had given him was Warren Cross. Gideon sat on the Road King in the parking lot of Stabler's for 40 seconds without starting the engine. 40 seconds was a long time for a man like Gideon to sit still, and he knew it, and he used every one of them, because what came after those 40 seconds was going to require him to be exact about what he knew versus what he suspected. And the distance between those two things was where men made the kind of mistakes that couldn't be walked back. Warren Cross. The name connected to 3 things simultaneously, the way some names do when they've been sitting in the back of your mind in a box you've never opened because opening it would require you to deal with what's inside. Gideon opened it now, methodically, in the cold morning air with his breath coming out white and the parking lot empty except for a county truck idling near the road. Warren Cross had been a financial contractor, that was the polite word for it, who'd done work for 3 different MC chapters across 2 states in the early years of the decade. The kind of work that involved moving money through legal adjacent channels in ways that generated paperwork that looked legitimate until someone with specific knowledge looked at it long enough to understand what the paperwork was actually saying. He had a legitimate business, a small fleet management company out of Garrison, 2 counties north, that served as the architecture around which the other work was built. Gideon knew this because 6 years ago, Iron Covenant had briefly, informally,
through an intermediary, considered using Cross for something similar. Gideon had been the one to say no. He had said no, not because he had specific information, but because Cross had the particular smoothness of men who are very good at being exactly what any given situation requires them to be. And Gideon had lived long enough to know that that kind of smoothness was not a skill set. It was a survival mechanism, and survival mechanisms that sophisticated generally indicated something worth surviving from. He had been right to say no. He simply hadn't known yet about Caleb. He started the engine. Dutch was parked across the street from Claire's building in a loading zone with his hazards on, which was as close to invisible as a man on a Sportster could get in a residential neighborhood at 8:30 in the morning. He had a gas station coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, and when Gideon pulled up alongside him and cut the engine, Dutch lowered his window. He had borrowed a neighbor's truck for this, smarter, and looked at him with the expression of a man who has been waiting for information he's not sure he wants. "Warren Cross," Gideon said. Dutch's face did something Gideon had only seen it do twice before, a kind of going away. A brief internal departure that left the external features in place but drained them of whatever made them Dutch. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. "You know the name," Gideon said. "Caleb mentioned it," Dutch said. "Once, right after, maybe 3 weeks before he died. We were replacing a cylinder head in the garage, and he said something about a man named Cross who was helping him work through something, and I asked what kind of something, and he said—" Dutch stopped. He looked at the coffee in his hand. "He said financial. He said it was a financial thing he'd gotten into, and he was working his way out of it, and Cross was the man helping him do that. He said Cross was helping him. That's what he said. And you didn't tell me." "He asked me not to." Dutch said it without apology, not defiantly. Simply the way you state the conditions of a thing you're not proud of but stand behind. "He asked me not to involve you. He said you'd try to fix it, and fixing it the way you fix things would make it worse, and he was handling it, and I believed him because it was Caleb, and Caleb had handled things before, and I—" He stopped, exhaled. "I was wrong." The loading zone was quiet. A woman walked past on the sidewalk with a stroller, not looking at them. A pigeon examined something near the building entrance with the focused optimism of a creature that has learned to look for value in improbable places. "Cross wasn't helping him work his way out," Gideon said. "Cross was the thing he was in. Cross was using his access codes, Dutch. Remy found the money trail. 4 years ago, 3 weeks after you and Caleb had that conversation in the garage, Remy confronted Caleb in a parking lot with what he'd found, and Caleb drove away in whatever state a man drives away in when everything he thought he was managing has just been revealed to be managing him." He paused. "And the next morning, he was on the wrong road." Dutch didn't say anything for a long time. A car passed. The pigeon found whatever it was looking for and moved on. "The access codes," Dutch said carefully. "If Cross was using them, or had Caleb using them, what was moving through them? I don't know the full shape yet, but Cross's fleet management company is a real operation. It has real trucks, and trucks that operate through rural counties on irregular schedules with legitimate paperwork have uses beyond fleet management." Dutch looked up. "How far beyond?" "Far enough that Caleb finding out about it and Caleb dying on a remote road 12 days later is not a coincidence I'm willing to file under bad luck." Gideon put his phone away. "Remy says Cross knows Noah exists. He thinks Caleb left something, evidence, documentation, something, and that Noah either has it or can lead someone to it. Noah is 10 years old. Cross doesn't care how old he is. He cares what Caleb might have told him or left for him." Dutch set down the coffee very deliberately on the center console. He was a man who had been in situations before. He had the particular physical economy of someone who has learned that when things become serious, economy of motion is a form of readiness. "So what do we do?" "I need to talk to Claire," Gideon said. "Not a conversation she can end by driving away. A real one." "She won't open the door." "Then I'll stand outside it until she does." I was right that she wouldn't open the door. He stood in the third-floor hallway of her building for 11 minutes before she opened it, and she opened it with the chain still on, 3 inches of gap, her face in the gap, and her eyes doing the rapid calculation of a woman assessing threat level, the way you assess it. When threat level has been a relevant variable in your life for long enough to make the assessment automatic. "I told you not to come looking for us," she said.
I know. Then why?
Because someone else is. He said it flat, without preparation, because there was no version of preparation that was going to make this easier, and the time for easier had ended approximately 40 seconds after Remy said the name. Someone with a reason to. Someone connected to how Caleb died. The chain stayed on. Her eyes stayed on his face, moving across it the way eyes move when they're reading something, checking for the tells that mean a person is performing rather than speaking. She was good at it. He'd expected her to be good at it. "You have 2 minutes," she said. "I need more than 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to make me decide to give you more." He told her about Remy. He told her about the parking lot conversation. He told her about the access codes and the money and Warren Cross and the fleet management company. He told her that Cross had been notified 4 days ago that Noah had been seen talking to Iron Covenant, and he told her what he believed that notification meant in terms of what Cross might do next. He told her in 1 minute and 40 seconds because he had always been efficient with words when words were what stood between something bad and something worse. The chain came off. She opened the door and stood aside and didn't say anything, and he came in. The apartment was small and exactly as organized as a person can make a space when organization is the primary tool available for managing a life that keeps trying to become unmanageable. The couch had a folded blanket on it, with the precision of someone who folds blankets, because unfolded blankets are one more thing not under control. The kitchen table had Noah's math homework on it from last night, pencil set parallel to the paper. There was a photograph on the refrigerator. Noah at maybe 7, gap-toothed, holding a fish he'd clearly just caught, grinning with his whole face. No photographs of Caleb anywhere that Gideon could see. Claire stood with her arms crossed, not defensively, just the way people stand when they need something to do with their hands, and they've ruled out most of the other options. She was still in her work clothes. She hadn't slept since the hospital shift, Gideon realized. She had gone from the shift to the bus to the school drop-off to here, and she was running on whatever people run on when everything else runs out. "Tell me about Warren Cross," she said. "What do you already know?" Caleb never mentioned the name to me, but 3 weeks before he died, he spent 2 nights at the kitchen table with the laptop and a lot of paper, and he wouldn't tell me what he was working on. He said it was club business. She paused. He was a bad liar. He'd always been a bad liar about things that mattered, which is why I trusted him about things that didn't. He wasn't lying about it being club business, but he was lying about what kind. He was trying to document it, Gideon said. That's what I think the nights at the laptop were. He'd found out what Cross had been using his credentials for, and he was trying to build something before he went to anyone with it. Did he succeed? I don't know. Remy didn't find anything after, but Remy wasn't looking for documentation. He was looking for culpability. Those are different searches. Claire uncrossed her arms. She went to the kitchen counter and stood with her back to him for a moment. Her shoulders did something, a slow, controlled drop, the exhale of someone setting down a very specific weight. Then she turned around. "There's a box," she said. Gideon went still. "Under my bed. I've had it since he died. There are photographs in it, which you apparently already know because Noah found it." She said that with a tone that was not quite anger, more the exhausted acknowledgement of a mother who has learned that children find things, have always found things, will continue to find things regardless of how well you think you have hidden them. But there's also an envelope, sealed, his handwriting on the outside. It says Gideon. The kitchen was very quiet. "He left it for you," she said. "I didn't open it. I almost did, 3 times, but it had your name on it, and he put your name on it for a reason, and I—" She stopped. "I was angry enough that I almost burned it. I want you to know that. I need you to understand that when I tell you I kept it in spite of being angry enough to burn it, and that decision did not feel noble at the time." "I understand," Gideon said. She went to the bedroom. He heard the scrape of something being pulled from under a bed frame. She came back with a shoebox, the lid held down with a rubber band, and she set it on the kitchen table next to Noah's homework. And she pulled out a letter-sized envelope that was sealed with tape. Not just the flap, but tape along all 4 edges, thorough, the way a man seals something he needs to stay sealed. And she held it out. Gideon took it. His name was on the front in Caleb's handwriting. Block letters, pressed hard, the pen strokes of someone writing with intention. He didn't open it there. He held it and looked at it, and something moved through him that he was not going to name. and Claire watched him not naming it with an expression that was complicated and tired and had no particular room in it for sentiment. "Read it somewhere else," she said, "and then tell me what it says." "Everything?" "Everything that affects Noah." He nodded. He put the envelope inside his cut, against his chest, and he went to the door, and then he stopped because something had occurred to him, something that had been sitting at the edge of his attention since he walked into the apartment and was now demanding to be addressed. "The box," he said. "Noah found it." "Yes." "Did he find the envelope?" Claire's expression shifted. It was a small shift, the kind that people who have learned to manage their expressions make when something gets past the management. "He's never mentioned it." "But if he saw it, he would have asked about it," she said. But her voice had gone slightly uncertain, and they both heard the uncertainty, and neither of them said what the uncertainty meant, which was that a 10-year-old boy who was very good at patience and very good at watching and very good at finding things might have looked at an envelope addressed to a man named Gideon and done the same thing his mother had done. Kept it, held it, made a decision about it that he hadn't disclosed yet. "Where is he right now?" Gideon said. "School." "He's at school, he's fine." "Call the school, just to confirm." Something in his voice made her reach for the phone without arguing. She was on hold with the front office for 30 seconds. 30 seconds in which Gideon stood at the apartment door with his hand on the frame and listened to the building around them. The plumbing in the walls, the elevator doing its broken thing 1 floor below, the muffled television from the apartment next door, and did the math on how long it had been since he left Stabler's and how long Remy had been sitting on this information before deciding to share it, and how many hours that gap represented. "He's there," Claire said. "They just confirmed. He's in class." Gideon released the door frame. "Don't go anywhere without calling me first. Don't let Noah walk anywhere without you or someone I designate." "I have work," she said. "I know. I can't just—" "I know. We'll figure that out." He opened the door. "Lock this behind me. Both locks." She looked at him. "You think he's already watching?" "I think a man who has been operating for this long without getting caught is not careless," Gideon said. "And I think careless is the only thing that's kept this quiet for 4 years. He went down the stairs. He heard both locks engage behind him. Dutch had moved the truck by the time Gideon came out. He was now half a block north in a different parking spot, which was the right instinct. Same vehicle in the same spot for too long becomes part of the landscape, and the landscape is the first thing a careful man surveys. Gideon got into the passenger seat and Dutch looked at the envelope inside his cut and didn't ask. Gideon pulled it out. He opened it. There were 4 pages inside, handwritten front and back on legal pad paper, in Caleb's compressed block printing, dated 3 weeks before the accident. No salutation, no preamble. Caleb had never been a man for preamble. He read it. He read all 8 sides without stopping. The only indication of what was on the pages was what his face did while he read, which was very little. A slight tightening around the left eye at the bottom of page 2. A complete cessation of movement that lasted about 4 seconds in the middle of page 3. And at the end, a long stillness that Dutch recognized and did not interrupt. Then Gideon folded the pages and put them back in the envelope and held the envelope on his knee with both hands flat on top of it. "Tell me," Dutch said. "Cross wasn't using Caleb's credentials," Gideon said. Caleb gave them willingly. At first. 2 years before he died. He was in debt, medical debt, from before Noah was born, something Claire had and they hadn't cleared, and Cross approached him through a third party with what looked like a consulting arrangement. Move some paperwork through some accounts, clean money coming out, all the mess happening somewhere Caleb couldn't see. He told himself he wasn't involved in the part that mattered. He told himself the credentials were just a name on a document. Dutch said nothing. Then he started to understand what the trucks were carrying, Gideon said, and what the routes meant, and who was on the other end of the routes. He paused. That's what the nights at the laptop were. He wasn't just documenting Cross. He was documenting the routes, the schedules, the contacts, the volumes. He spent 3 weeks building a package that would be comprehensive enough to be actionable, and not just the word of a man who had his own reasons to make accusations. What was moving through the trucks? Dutch said. People, Gideon said. Undocumented. Through rural routes, in vehicles with legitimate registration, at irregular intervals designed to avoid pattern recognition. He looked out the windshield at the quiet street. Cross was running a transport operation. Caleb called it, he used the word pipeline. He said he found 3 confirmed routes and evidence of at least 4 others. He said the volumes were significant. The truck was very quiet. Remy found money moving through chapter accounts, Dutch said slowly, which means the chapter accounts were part of the architecture. Which means Cross has exposure that extends to every person whose name appears in those accounts. Which means that if Caleb's documentation surfaces, it doesn't just take down Cross, Dutch said. It implicates the chapter. It implicates anyone connected to those accounts. He exhaled. It implicates us. Chapter accounts, Gideon said. Not individual accounts. The chapter is an entity. But that distinction doesn't matter to a federal investigator, and it doesn't matter to Cross. Dutch sat with that for a moment. Then, the documentation. Where is it? That's the problem, Gideon said. He finished it. He says in the letter that he finished it, and he put it somewhere safe before he went to talk to Remy. He says in the letter that if something happened to him, the documentation would find its way to the right people, and in the meantime he put it where no one would look who didn't know to look. Where? Gideon looked at the letter in his hands. He gave it to Noah, he said. Dutch turned to look at him. Not directly. He says he put it in something that would go to Noah when he was old enough. Something Claire would keep without knowing what it was because it looks like something else. He says, Gideon found the line on page 4 and read it aloud, flat. The boy will know what it is when he finds it, because I told him the story about the compass when he was 4, and he remembered everything I ever told him, the way kids do when they're paying attention. Silence. Noah was 4, Dutch said. He can't remember. He memorized a philosophy off a hidden photograph, Gideon said, verbatim, at 10. He looked at Dutch. He remembers everything. Dutch put his hands on the steering wheel and looked through the windshield and made no sound for a long time. Then quietly, Cross thinks Caleb told Noah something directly. He doesn't know it's in an object. No. Which means Cross's interest in Noah is interrogative. He wants to know what Noah knows. He doesn't know Noah might be holding evidence he's never been told is evidence. We need to get to Noah. We need to get to Noah. Figure out what the object is and where it is, get Claire somewhere safe, and contain Cross before he realizes we're moving. Gideon was opening the truck door as he said it. None of that can happen in the order I want it to happen. I was on the sidewalk and halfway to the Road King when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Dutch, from the truck. Which was wrong. Dutch was in the truck. Dutch should be calling from inside the truck, not sending a text while Gideon was standing 10 feet away. He looked up. Dutch was not in the truck. The truck was empty. The passenger door was open on the far side. Gideon moved around the front of the vehicle fast, hand going to his side, and Dutch was on the ground behind the rear wheel. Not down, not unconscious, crouched, pressed against the quarter panel with his phone in his hand and his eyes on a point across the street. Gideon crouched beside him without speaking. Dutch tilted his chin. Across the street, a dark blue sedan, parked. 2 men in the front, another visible in the rear passenger seat. Engine running, Gideon could see the exhaust in the cold air. The sedan was angled toward the building entrance. It had not been there when Gideon came out. How long? Gideon said, barely voice. Came in right after you went to the sidewalk, Dutch said. Parked fast. Stayed in the vehicle. Engine on. 3 of them. That I can see. Gideon looked at the building entrance. Claire was on the 3rd floor, both locks. The envelope was in his cut, against his chest, with everything Caleb had built inside it. Noah was at school, 8 blocks east, confirmed in class 6 minutes ago. He looked at the blue sedan. One of the men in the front had his phone to his ear. Gideon stood up very deliberately. Not fast, not slow, with the complete physical control of a man who has decided that visibility is now the tool. And he walked around to the driver's side of Dutch's truck, and he got in, and he put it in reverse, and he pulled out of the parking spot and drove at normal speed toward the school. And in the rearview mirror, the blue sedan sat still for exactly 4 seconds, and then pulled out and followed. He had their attention. That was the point. He had their attention, which meant their attention was not on the building, which meant Claire had whatever window existed between now and when they figured out the split. He drove toward the school. His phone was on the seat. He picked it up and called a number from memory. No contact saved, a number he had memorized because some numbers should not exist in a searchable form. and it rang twice before someone picked up. "I need the chapter," Gideon said. "Everyone available. School on Mercer, that's Mercer Street, 8 blocks east of the Route 9 apartment. Now." He hung up. He looked in the rearview mirror. The sedan was 3 cars back, keeping distance. Professional, practiced. The kind of following that had been done before. He pulled into the school's visitor lot and got out of the truck. He walked through the front entrance and showed identification to the woman at the desk, and said he was there to pick up Noah Mercer on behalf of the family, and he needed to do it quietly, and he needed to do it now. The woman looked at him. At the cut. At the road name. "Is there an emergency?" she said. Gideon looked at her. "Yes," he said. "There is." She picked up the phone. Outside in the parking lot, through the school's front window, Gideon could see the blue sedan parked at the curb. The engine was still running. The man in the back seat was looking at the school entrance with the patient, professional attention of someone who has been told to watch something and is watching it. And sitting in the sedan's front passenger seat, turned sideways now to look at Gideon through the glass with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely without apology, was a man Gideon had not expected to see. A man who should not have been in this county, should not have known about the school or the apartment or any of it. A man whose presence here meant the leak was not a loose word in a bar, but something older and closer and built into the structure of things in a way that Gideon had not yet found. The man in the passenger seat was wearing a jacket with no patches. He raised one hand slowly and gave Gideon a small, deliberate wave. Behind the front desk, the secretary was saying Noah Mercer's name into the phone, and in the parking lot, the sedan sat with its engine running, and Gideon understood with complete clarity that the thing he had believed was a problem, he was getting ahead of, had been ahead of him the entire time. He turned from the window when he heard sneakers on the hallway floor. Noah came around the corner with his backpack on and his jacket half-zipped, and he stopped when he saw Gideon, and his face did 2 things very quickly. The first was relief, which surprised Gideon and should not have, and the second was something else, something older and more deliberate. The expression of a child who has been waiting for a specific moment and has just recognized it. "I know what the compass is," Noah said. Gideon looked at him. "Dad's compass," Noah said. "The one from the story. I know where it is." He looked past Gideon toward the window, and Gideon turned, and the blue sedan was still there, engine still running, the man with no patches still watching. Noah looked back at Gideon with the eyes of a boy who was 10 years old and understood approximately as much as a 10-year-old should never have to understand. "I've known for a while," Noah said. "I was waiting until I understood why it mattered." Gideon crouched to eye level. His knees popped on the way down. "How long?" he said. "Since the gas station," Noah said. "When you said the thing about building something that outlasts the storm." He looked at Gideon with Caleb's eyes, and something that was entirely his own. "Dad told me the same thing when I was 4, right before he gave me the compass to hold. He said this is what outlasts the storm. I thought it was just a story." He paused. "It's not just a compass, is it?" Outside, the sedan door opened and the man with no patches stepped onto the curb, and he stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at the school entrance, and he waited. "No," Gideon said, "it's not just a compass." "Then we have to go get it," Noah said, "before they do." And Gideon looked at the boy, 10 years old, broken jacket zipper, Caleb's jaw, Caleb's stillness, his own particular and entirely irreducible self, and understood that the moment had just moved irrevocably past every version of this, where he could still be the one deciding who was protected and who was doing the protecting, because Noah Mercer had already decided. The man with no patches had a name. Gideon found it out 40 seconds later when his phone buzzed, and the text from a number he recognized as belonging to a man named Briggs, who ran Stablers and heard everything that moved through it, said 3 words: "Cross is outside." So Cross had come himself. That meant one of 2 things. Either Cross was confident enough in his position that he felt no need for distance, or the situation had escalated past the point where proxies were sufficient. Either interpretation was bad. The first meant he believed he was untouchable. The second meant he was running out of time and knew it, which made him more dangerous than a man with patience, because careful men in a hurry made brutal calculations. Gideon looked at Noah. Then he looked at the secretary behind the desk, who was watching both of them with the expression of someone who has realized the conversation she was peripheral to is significantly larger than it appeared and is now recalculating her role in it. "Is there a back exit?" Gideon said to her. "Maintenance corridor," she said. "Through the gym. Take us there." She stood up without hesitation, which told Gideon something about her that he filed away with appreciation. Some people, when the situation clarifies itself, simply act. She was one of those people. She came around the desk with her lanyard keys in hand and moved into the hallway, and Gideon put his hand on Noah's shoulder. Not gripping, just present, the weight of contact that means I have you without requiring the words. And they followed. The hallway smelled like institutional cleaner and old lunch. Noah's sneakers were quiet on the linoleum. Gideon's boots were not, but boots on linoleum. In an empty school hallway were not the sound problem. The sound problem was the front door opening behind them, which Gideon heard as they turned the corner toward the gym, a controlled push of metal against metal, measured, not forced. They were already moving. The maintenance corridor was narrow and lit by fluorescents that ran on a separate, dimmer circuit than the main building, giving the whole passage the quality of a space that had never been intended for anything other than function. Pipes ran overhead. The smell changed to something metallic and warm. The secretary unlocked a door at the far end without fumbling. She had done this before, or she was the kind of person who never fumbles with locks, and Gideon didn't care which, and it opened onto an exterior stairwell on the building's east face, overlooking the school's maintenance yard, which was enclosed by a chain-link fence with a gate that was padlocked, but whose padlock was a combination type and old enough that the metal had gone soft with weather. "Thank you," Gideon said to the secretary. She looked at Noah. She looked at Gideon. "Take care of him," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She went back into the corridor and pulled the door shut, and Gideon heard the lock engage from the inside. He looked at the fence, then at Noah. "You climb?" he said. "Yeah," Noah said. "Don't wait for me to ask twice." Noah was at the fence in 4 steps and moving up it with the practiced ease of a kid who has grown up in places where fences exist and have been climbed. Gideon followed, heavier, the chain link bowing slightly under his weight, and they dropped to the other side onto cracked maintenance yard asphalt, and Gideon's knee said something about the impact that he acknowledged and ignored. His phone was already at his ear. "Where are you?" he said. The voice on the other end, Briggs, running now from the sound of it, said, "Lot's compromised. Cross has 2 vehicles, one on the main entrance, one came around the east side 60 seconds ago. How many total? I count 6 outside, don't know what's inside. Dutch. Coming in from the north, 40 seconds. Gideon looked at the maintenance yard gate, chain link, padlocked, east face of the property. Beyond it, a service road that connected to the street grid 2 blocks from Route 9. North face of the property, he said. Service road entrance. Now. He hung up and looked at Noah, who was standing with his backpack straps in both hands, and his eyes moving the way eyes move when a person is tracking multiple points of information simultaneously. The fence, the building, the service road, Gideon's face. The kid was not panicking. That was going to cost him something later, when the adrenaline resolved and the body sent its invoice. But right now it was the most useful thing happening in the maintenance yard. "The compass," Gideon said. "Where is it?" "At home," Noah said. "In my room." "Where in your room?" "Inside the lining of my old winter coat. The red one from 2 years ago that Mom kept because it has sentimental—" He stopped. His expression shifted. "She kept it because Dad gave it to me. She didn't know that's why I asked her to keep it." The service road was quiet. Somewhere on the other side of the building, an engine revved. Not a Harley, something modern and restrained, the engine note of a vehicle designed to be unremarkable, and then went quiet. Strategic positioning, they were tightening. "We need to get to that coat before they get to your mother," Gideon said. "Mom is at the apartment?" "She was. I told her to lock the door." Noah looked at him with Caleb's eyes. "She doesn't know Cross is here." "No." "We need to call her." "I know." He was already dialing as Dutch's truck came around the corner of the service road entrance, moving fast. Dutch's face through the windshield with the particular blankness of controlled urgency. Gideon pulled the gate with both hands. The chain gave him 18 inches, enough. And Noah went through sideways, and Gideon followed, and they were at the truck before Dutch had fully stopped. Back seat, both of them. Gideon pulled the door shut, and Dutch was moving before the latch caught. Claire picked up on the second ring. "Don't open the door for anyone," Gideon said. "Not building management, not a neighbor, not anyone you don't know. I'm coming." A beat. "What's happening?" "Cross is here. He came himself." He paused. "Noah is with me. He's fine. Stay on the phone." He could hear her breathing change, not into panic, into the other thing, the controlled compression that was its own form of combat. "How long until you're here?" 7 minutes. "Okay." "Don't hang up." "Okay." Dutch was running parallel to Route 9 on the surface streets, not using the highway because the highway was exposure, and his driving was the driving of a man who has learned the difference between fast and reckless through experience with both. The truck handled the turns cleanly. Noah was in the back seat with both hands on his knees and the phone conversation happening 12 inches from his face, and he was listening to his mother's voice on the other end of the line, with the expression of a child who has decided that the most useful thing he can do right now is stay extremely still. 3 vehicles, Briggs said on a second call, Dutch's phone now on speaker between the seats. 2 sedans and a panel van. Van is concerning. "Where's the van?" Gideon said. Circling, hasn't stopped. South side, then west side, now I've lost it." Dutch glanced at Gideon. Panel van on a circling pattern meant it was either surveilling or waiting for a signal. Neither option was acceptable at this proximity to the apartment building. "Chapter?" Gideon said. 4 riders coming in from the south route. Vic's leading. 2 more coming from the valley. 15 minutes. "I don't have 15 minutes." "I know." He switched back to Claire. "Are the windows locked?" "Yes." "Don't stand near them." Her exhale on the other end was careful. "Gideon?" "Yeah." "Tell me straight. How bad?" He looked out the truck window at the streets going past. Familiar streets, streets he'd driven for years, streets that had been indifferent and navigable, and now had a different quality, the quality of terrain being evaluated. "It's manageable," he said, "if we move correctly." "That's not straight." "No," he agreed. "It's manageable if we don't make mistakes." She was quiet for 2 seconds. "Then don't make mistakes." "No, ma'am, that." They came in from the north approach, Dutch pulling into the building's service alley at the rear, a narrow slot between the building and the neighboring structure that smelled like dumpster in winter and was wide enough for the truck with approximately 14 inches to spare on each side. Gideon was out before the truck finished stopping, moving to the building's rear service door, which was steel and required a code that he did not have. "Noah," he said. Noah was beside him. "I know the code," he said. "Mrs. Garza on the 2nd floor. I help her carry groceries sometimes. She gave it to me last winter in case—" He was already at the keypad. 4 digits. The lock released with a heavy thunk. They went in. The rear stairwell smelled like concrete and pipe insulation. Gideon took the stairs at a controlled pace, fast enough, not so fast that he arrived at the 3rd floor with no capacity for what might be waiting. And Noah matched him, the kids breathing elevated but even, sneakers on metal stairs, 3 flights, and then the 3rd floor hallway, which was empty and quiet and smelled like someone's dinner from 2 hours ago. Claire's door. Gideon knocked twice fast, once slow. A code they hadn't established. It didn't matter. She looked through the peephole first and he could feel her doing it. And then both locks disengaged and she opened the door and Noah went straight to her, and she had one arm around him and her other hand was still holding her phone, and her eyes were on Gideon over the top of Noah's head, and the question in them was, not are we safe, because she already knew the answer to that. The question was, what do we do next? "The coat," Gideon said. She looked at Noah. Noah extracted himself from the arm and went to his room and came back in 30 seconds with a red child's winter coat, too small for him now, worn at the elbows, a coat that had been kept because a dead man had given it to his son, and he held it out to Gideon. Gideon took it. He felt along the lining, not the inside surface, the structural lining between the outer shell and the interior fabric. At the left side seam, near the hem, the stitching was different, newer. Someone had opened this seam and restitched it with a slightly different thread color, close enough to pass a casual look, different enough to find if you knew to look. He pulled the thread with his thumbnail, carefully. 3 inches of seam opened. Inside, folded into a rectangle no larger than a playing card, was a folded piece of cardstock, and wrapped around it, held against it with a rubber band that had dried and gone brittle but still held, was a compass. Small, brass, the kind that folds into its own case, with an engraving on the cover that Gideon had to angle toward the hallway light to read. Build something that outlasts the storm. CM. He held it for a moment. Then he set the compass on the kitchen table and unfolded the cardstock. It was a QR code, printed clean, high resolution, on cardstock that had survived 2 years inside a coat lining with no degradation because Caleb Mercer had been the kind of man who understood that documentation was only as good as its preservation. Below the QR code, in the same block printing from the letter, everything cross, full package, encrypted. Password is the thing you told Noah when he was 4 that you never told me. Gideon looked at Noah. Noah was already looking at him. He told me a password, Noah said. He said it was the most important word I would ever know, and I should never forget it and never say it until I needed to. He paused. He said I'd know when. Do you know when? Noah looked at his mother, then at the compass on the table, then at Gideon. Yeah, he said. A sound came from outside. Not the street, the hallway. A door, 1 floor below, opening and not closing. Then steps on stairs, but not the rhythm of a resident, not the ease of someone moving through familiar space. The rhythm of approach. Measured. More than one set. Dutch's voice came through the phone on the table. Van stopped, he said. South side of the building. 3 men out, moving to the entrance. Claire's hand found Noah's shoulder. Gideon picked up the compass and the coat and the cardstock and moved to the window, staying to the side of the frame. Below, on the street's south approach, he could see the van. A dark panel vehicle, nondescript, the kind of vehicle that exists in cities to be ignored. 2 men were at the building's main entrance. A third was staying with the vehicle. 3 downstairs. Unknown configuration in the hallway below. 1 Dutch and a truck in the service alley with a clear line to the rear exit, but compromised if the van repositioned. 4 chapter riders coming from the south, minutes away. Too many variables moving too fast. Noah, Gideon said. The password, the encrypted package. Once it's accessed, it's done. Whatever Caleb documented, it goes to whoever I send it to, and Cross loses the leverage that makes Noah valuable to him. He looked at the boy. Once that happens, Cross has no reason to come after your family. But if that package gets to him instead, if he gets that compass and that code before we do this, then everything your father built gets erased and Cross walks, and this never ends. Noah looked at the cardstock in Gideon's hand. He can't have it, Noah said. No. Then we send it now. I need your phone, Gideon said to Claire. Mine's compromised. They've had enough time to flag the number. I need a clean device and I need 30 seconds. She handed it over without speaking. The steps in the stairwell were on the 2nd floor now. Gideon could hear them moving up. He scanned the QR code with Claire's phone. It opened a cloud storage link, a service Caleb had set up years ago under a name that wasn't his, with an access gate that prompted for a password field. He turned the phone to Noah. Say it, Gideon said. Type it. Noah took the phone. He looked at the password field. He typed 11 characters with the focused deliberation of a child who has been holding something in trust for 6 years and understands exactly what releasing it means. He hit enter. The loading bar moved. The steps stopped outside the apartment door. The knock came. 3 times, heavy, the knock of someone who is not asking. Then a voice, flat, entirely without urgency, the voice of a man who has decided that patience is the most effective form of violence. Mr. Voss, I think we should talk. Warren Cross. In the hallway, outside the door. Gideon looked at the loading bar on Claire's phone. 60%, 70. He looked at the door. He looked at Noah. Noah's jaw was set. He looked exactly like his father at the worst moment of his father's life, which was also the bravest moment of his father's life, which were probably the same moment. And that convergence was one of the things Caleb Mercer had never gotten the chance to understand about himself. Keep your hand on that phone, Gideon said to Noah. Don't move. Then he turned to the door. 3 things happened in the next 8 seconds, fast and overlapping, the way real things happen when they stop being theoretical. The loading bar hit 85%. Gideon's hand went to the deadbolt, And from outside the building, from the South Street, from the direction of the van, from the direction that Dutch had been watching, came the sound that meant the chapter had arrived 12 minutes early because Vic had pushed every speed law between the valley and Route 9 and had brought not 4 riders, but 7. The sound of 7 Harley-Davidson engines arriving in coordinated formation is not a subtle sound. It is the sound of intention announcing itself. It is the sound of men who have decided, collectively, that something ends here. Cross heard it. There was a pause outside the door. A long one. The kind of pause that recalculates. 90%. Gideon's hand stayed on the deadbolt. He could hear Cross breathing on the other side of the door. He could hear the men with Cross shifting their weight, the scuff of shoes on hallway linoleum, and one of them said something low, and Cross said nothing back. And the silence from Cross was the silence of a man deciding which calculation wins. 95. The Harleys outside were not moving. They had stopped, positioned, Gideon knew without seeing, in a formation that blocked the van and the sedans and every exit from the building's south and west faces. Vic would have done it exactly right because Vic always did it exactly right. And whatever conversation was happening between 7 Iron Covenant riders and Cross's vehicles on the street below was not a conversation with good options for Cross's side. A door opened 2 floors below. Then the rear entrance. Gideon heard the steel door, heard Dutch's voice in the stairwell, one word, carrying up through concrete, Gideon. 100%. The upload complete notification appeared on Claire's phone. The package had gone to 3 separate recipients simultaneously. The contacts Caleb had listed in the encrypted file header, contacts that Gideon did not recognize but that had federal area codes and the specific naming convention of secure governmental channels. Caleb Mercer had not been building evidence for a civil lawsuit. He had been building a federal case. From the hallway, Cross's voice came again, and this time it was different, flatter. The flatness of a man who has just received information through his earpiece or his phone that has changed the calculus of the next 30 seconds. This doesn't end here, Voss. Gideon's hand came off the deadbolt. It ends where it ends, he said through the door. Your call on where that is. A long silence. Then footsteps, moving away. Measured, controlled, the retreat of a man who has decided that today's position is not worth the cost, and that the decision about cost can be deferred to a moment when the variables are better arranged. And the patience required for that deferral is the patience of someone who has been operating for a long time and believes he will continue to operate for a long time, regardless of what happens in a third-floor hallway in November. The stairwell door opened. The footsteps went down. Gideon stood with his hand on the deadbolt and listened until he couldn't hear them anymore. Then he turned around. Noah was standing with Claire's phone in both hands, the upload confirmation still on the screen, and Claire had both arms around him from behind, her chin at the top of his head, and she was not saying anything, and Noah was not saying anything, and the apartment was completely quiet except for the sound of 7 Harley engines idling on the street below. Patient, steady, the sound of men who came when called and stayed until they knew it was done. Gideon looked at the compass on the kitchen table. The engraving caught the light from the hallway. Build something that outlasts the storm. Dutch appeared in the apartment doorway. He had come up the rear stairs. Gideon heard the knock on the service door, and Claire had opened it without being asked. Instinct overriding everything else, in the simple logic of that knock sounds like Dutch. And he stood in the kitchen doorway with his jacket dark at the shoulders from the cold, and his gray beard and his limp and his face, which was doing what Dutch's face did when something had been survived that he had not been completely sure would be survived. Van's gone, Dutch said. 2 sedans left when Vic came in. Cross's people scattered. Cross himself? Got into a vehicle on the North Street, drove west. Dutch paused. He'll be gone by morning. He'll be indicted before morning, Gideon said. 3 federal contacts got Caleb's package 8 minutes ago. Dutch looked at the phone in Noah's hands, then at the compass on the table, then at Gideon. Caleb built a federal case, Dutch said. Yeah. From inside. He was trying to get out, Gideon said. He just ran out of time before he could do it on his own terms. The silence stretched. Outside, one of the Harleys revved once. A communication. Gideon knew the sound. It was Vic saying, "We're good. We're here. We're waiting on your word," and then went back to idle. Claire was looking at Gideon over the top of her son's head, and the question in her expression was the same one it had been when she opened the door, but the version of it that came after surviving a thing instead of before, which is the version that has different weight. "Is it over?" she said. Gideon picked up the compass from the kitchen table. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the brass, the hinge of the case, the worn edge where a thumb had opened and closed it enough times to polish away the factory finish. He had never held it before. He had never seen it before today. But he had heard Caleb talk about it once, in passing, in the garage, in the way that men with children sometimes talk about objects that have become heavy with meaning. "I gave Noah my dad's compass. I told him it was for navigation. I didn't tell him what I meant by that." He had never explained what he meant by that because he had not come home. "The legal piece will take time," Gideon said. "Cross has resources. He'll run before he's caught. But what Caleb built," he held up the compass. "What Caleb built is comprehensive. Remy said so. Dates, routes, volumes, contacts. Cross can run, but the thing that made him dangerous, the operation, the structure, the routes, that's finished." Claire looked at him. "And Noah?" she said. "He's not. There's no reason for anyone to. Once the documentation is with federal contacts, Noah knowing the password becomes irrelevant. The value was always in the file, not in the knowledge." He paused. "Noah is not valuable to Cross anymore." She exhaled. It was long and controlled and comprehensive. The exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for a variable she has just been told is resolved, and her arms tightened around Noah for 1 second before she let them fall. Noah turned around to look at her. His expression was the expression of a 10-year-old who has just done something that no 10-year-old should ever have to do, and who is now, in the space after the doing, beginning to feel the full weight of it landing. His chin was shaking, very slightly. He caught it and stopped it, and his jaw went tight, and he looked exactly like Caleb doing the same thing in a different decade, and Claire saw it, and her hand came up to his face, and that was when the tears came. Not hers, not yet, but his, fast and furious, and immediately fought, the tears of a child who has been enormously brave for an enormous amount of time, and has just run out of the reserve. Gideon turned to give them the room. Dutch was in the doorway, looking at the floor, giving them the same room in the same way, because these were men who understood the precise social geometry of grief and had learned it from the inside. Outside the window, Route 9 ran south into the dark, and the Harleys idled on the street below, and the night was very cold and very clear, and the stars were the kind of stars that appear when the cloud cover finally breaks. Not soft, but sharp, exact, each one in its specific place. Gideon held the compass in his closed fist. He stood at the window and looked south down the road, and somewhere out there Warren Cross was in a vehicle going west at highway speed toward a horizon he would not reach cleanly, carrying 4 years of careful work toward a moment he did not yet know was already behind him. And on the kitchen table, Claire's phone sat with the upload confirmation still glowing on its screen, and Caleb Mercer's final act of accountability waited in 3 federal inboxes for morning when someone would open it and begin reading, and the reading would take a long time, because Caleb had been thorough, and thorough things take time, and some things that take time are the most important things. "Gideon," Noah said behind him. He turned. The boy had gotten himself back together. The jaw was set again. The eyes were clear, or clearing, still bright at the edges in the way eyes are after tears, but focused now, forward-facing, the eyes of someone who has located the next thing to do. He was holding out his hand. In his palm was the compass. "He would have wanted you to have it," Noah said. Gideon looked at the compass, at the engraving. "I don't think—" "He talked about you," Noah said, "in the stories he told me. Not by name, but I knew." He kept his hand out, steady. "He said there was a man who always stopped when someone needed stopping for. He said that man had never once in his life asked whether it was convenient." He paused. "That's you." "I knew it at the gas station." The compass sat in the boy's palm between them. Gideon Voss, who had not cried at Caleb's funeral because he had organized the funeral and there was too much to organize, who had not cried in 4 years because there had always been something that needed doing, and grief required a stillness he could not yet afford, took the compass from Noah's hand and closed his fingers around it and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and men who knew that did not try to make something adequate out of words. Below, on the street, Vic cut his engine. One by one, the others followed. And the silence that came after 7 Harley engines go quiet all at once was not empty, the way most silences are empty, but full. Full of everything that had happened, and everything that was going to happen next, and everything that a dead man had built in 3 weeks at a kitchen table because he loved his family more than he was afraid and had not been able to find any other way to say so. Noah was looking at the compass in Gideon's fist. "What happens now?" he said. Gideon looked at the boy, at Claire, at Dutch in the doorway with his limp and his gray beard and the specific tiredness of a man who has ridden a long way in cold weather for a long time and would do it again without being asked. He looked at the compass. He thought about morning. He thought about federal inboxes and a man driving west and 3 weeks of late-night documentation and a 4-year-old boy told to remember a word and a woman who sent back every envelope because she needed the people who sent them to understand that they were not yet square. He thought about a gas station on Route 9 in November and a boy crossing a parking lot without hesitating and the specific quality of recognition that hits you when you see a dead man's walk on a living child's body. "Now," Gideon said, "we get through tonight." He looked at Noah. "And then we talk about what comes after." The night outside was still and cold and the stars were sharp over Route 9. And inside the apartment the heat was running, and somewhere between tonight and what came after, Warren Cross was going to run out of road, and Caleb Mercer's final act was going to reach the people it was built to reach, and a 10-year-old boy was going to have to find a way to carry everything he had just done into the rest of his life. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Dutch put the kettle on. Tonight, the chapter was outside, and the door was locked, and the compass was found, and the storm had not taken everything after all. Because 4 years ago, a man who knew he was running out of time had built something and given it to his son to hold, and his son had held it, and now it was in the right hands. And all that remained was the question of what the right hands would do with what came next. The kettle began to whistle, and Noah Mercer sat down at the kitchen table beside his mother and put his hands flat on the surface, the way his father used to do when something had been decided, and waited for Gideon Voss to tell him what morning looked like. Morning came in slow, the way mornings do after nights that have taken something from you. The light through Claire's kitchen window was the thin, uncertain light of November dawn. Not warm, not golden, not the kind of light that announces itself with any confidence. It came in flat and gray across the table where Dutch had left 2 mugs and a kettle that had gone cold again, and it fell on the compass sitting between them, and the compass caught it and held it the way brass holds light, which is without warmth, but with a kind of honesty. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch at some point past 2. Claire had put the folded blanket over him, the one that was always precisely folded, the one that was its own form of control. And then she had sat in the kitchen chair across from Gideon, and they had talked for 3 hours in the way that people talk after something has cracked the surface of a long silence. Not easily, not smoothly. With the particular stops and restarts of 2 people who are used to carrying things alone attempting, for the first time, to carry something together. She had asked about the roots. He had told her what he knew. She had asked about the chapter accounts, and he had told her that too. All of it, without softening, because she had earned the version without softening 4 years ago, and he was 4 years late delivering it. She had listened with her hands around a mug that had gone cold, and her face doing nothing dramatic, just processing, the way competent people process hard information, steadily, without theater. Then she had asked about the night Caleb died. Gideon told her about the road. He told her what Remy had told him, which was not everything but was enough. That Caleb had left the parking lot in a state of mind that made the particular road he chose at that hour a decision rather than a random turn, and that the decision had a logic to it that was not recklessness, but something closer to the specific despair of a man who believed he had compromised the people he loved most and could not yet see the path back. He told her that Caleb had been building the documentation for 3 weeks before that night, which meant that in the same hours he was sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop, he was also building a way back. He had been doing both simultaneously, grieving the compromise and constructing the correction, because that was the kind of man Caleb Mercer was, the kind who could not do one without the other. Claire had been quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "He thought he'd destroyed everything." Yes. He hadn't. No. She looked at the compass. He always underestimated himself. Even when he was doing something right, He was convinced it wasn't going to be enough. She paused. That was the thing I couldn't reach. I could see it. I could see him building towards something and then convinced it had already failed before it finished. But I couldn't reach it. Nobody could, Gideon said, not from the outside. You could have, she said. He would have listened to you. Gideon didn't answer that. He had been living with that specific silence for 4 years, and he was not going to dress it up now with anything that made it more bearable than it was. It was not bearable. It was simply what it was, and what it was had to be carried. Claire watched him not answering and seemed to understand the not answering because she nodded once and let it go. And that was one of the things about her that Caleb had not exaggerated in the 3 photographs on the corkboard. The particular quality of her understanding, the way it arrived without needing to be acknowledged. What happens to Cross, she said. Federal contacts had the package by midnight. Remy got a confirmation call at 3 a.m. from a number he's been waiting on for 4 years. Someone he'd approached before and been told to wait, to keep waiting, that the case wasn't built yet. He paused. Caleb built it. It was built. They just needed it delivered. Will Cross be arrested? He's probably already running, but what he's running from isn't going away. The operation is documented end to end. Routes, contacts, schedules, financial flows. Cross can run, but the structure doesn't run with him. The infrastructure is burned. The people he moved, the channels he used, the accounts that made it look clean, all of it is in the package. He looked at the compass. Caleb spent 3 weeks making sure there was nowhere to hide inside it. And the chapter accounts, she said. That implicates Iron Covenant. The federal contacts Caleb listed are ones he chose specifically, Gideon said. Remy confirmed it. They're investigators who focus on the operators, not the infrastructure they co-opt. Cross used the chapter accounts without full disclosure to anyone in the chapter except whoever helped him set it up. And that person, Remy believes, was not an active member at the time. He paused. It's not clean. There will be questions. There may be interviews. But the documentation makes clear who was running the operation and who was used by it. Something moved across her face that she did not try to stop. And it was there for exactly as long as it needed to be, and then it was not. And she picked up the mug and found it cold and set it back down. I owe you an apology, she said. Not to Dutch specifically. To the room, to the 4 years, to the envelopes she had sent back with the carved-out middle portions. I thought keeping distance was protecting Noah. I thought if he didn't know about the club, he couldn't be pulled toward it. You were right to be careful, Gideon said. I was right to be careful and wrong about what I was being careful about, she said. There's a difference. She looked at the compass. He spent 4 years trying to understand his father through photographs and coat lining, because I buried everything. She paused. That's not protection. That's just a different kind of loss. Nobody argued with her. The kettle began to warm. Remy Call left town that morning. Gideon found out through Briggs, who found out through the particular small-town information network that exists in counties where everyone who matters has known everyone who matters for 20 years. Remy had checked out of wherever he'd been staying at 6 a.m., paid in cash, and taken his Sportster south on Route 9. No destination given, no contact information left. Gideon sat with that for a while. He thought about the parking lot 4 years ago, and what Remy had said, and what Caleb had heard. He thought about 4 years of Remy carrying the specific guilt of a man who had said a true thing at the wrong moment in the wrong way and watched the consequences leave in a car. He thought about Remy sitting in Stabler's with cold eggs, and a secret he had finally decided to set down. He thought about whether what Remy had done, the sitting on it, the eventual telling, balanced against each other into something that could be called even. He decided that wasn't his calculation to make. It was Remy's, and Remy would be making it on a southbound road for a long time, and that was the appropriate place to make it. He called Remy's number once. It rang through. He left no message. That was enough. The apartment on the 3rd floor of the building on the Route 9 approach did not stop being small because the crisis had passed. The brake noise on the Civic did not stop being a brake noise. The school clothes closet jacket with the broken zipper remained broken. The building manager still needed access on Friday between 8 and noon. These were the things that remained when the extraordinary receded, and Gideon Voss, who had spent 17 years navigating the extraordinary, was not prepared for how much the ordinary mattered in the days that followed. He showed up on Thursday with a battery for the Civic. He did not announce it. He parked beside the car and replaced the battery in 40 minutes and left. Claire texted him that evening. The car started. He texted back, "Good." That was the whole conversation, and it was sufficient. On Friday morning, he sent a woman named Deanna, a mechanic who worked out of the chapter garage and whose particular skill was making herself unremarkable in situations that required it, to the apartment at 750. Deanna sat with Noah while the building manager did the bathroom floor repair, and she and Noah spent 4 hours at the kitchen table where he helped her with a parts inventory. She was pretending to need help with, and she helped him with fractions he actually needed help with. And when Claire got back from the hospital shift, Deanna was gone, and Noah was at the table finishing his homework with the particular quiet satisfaction of a kid who has been in good company. "Who was that?" Claire said. "Deanna," Noah said. "She's a mechanic. She knows a lot about pistons." Claire set down her bag. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she went to the window and stood there for a while, looking at the parking lot where the Civic sat with its new battery and did not appear to be doing anything significant, but was, because working cars are not nothing. Working cars are everything when you are a woman who cannot afford for anything else to stop working. She did not cry. She was a person who had gotten very selective about when she cried, and this did not make the list, but it was close. 3 weeks after the night in the apartment, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Warren Cross in connection with a multi-state investigation into an undocumented transport network operating through commercial vehicle infrastructure. The warrant was not on the front page of anything. It was the kind of legal development that appears in specific court databases and industry publications and is noticed primarily by people who were looking for it. Remy had been looking for it. He texted Gideon a single word when it appeared, "Done." Gideon showed the text to Dutch. Dutch read it and handed the phone back without comment. They were in the garage at the time, Gideon replacing a throttle cable on the Road King, Dutch drinking coffee that was almost but not quite hot enough. And the space between them had the quality of the spaces between men who have arrived together at the far side of something difficult and are now existing in the particular quiet of aftermath. "The chapter accounts," Dutch said. "Federal inquiry, not prosecution," Gideon said. Cross's documentation is specific enough that the chapter's role is clearly co-opted rather than cooperative. "We'll have conversations. Some of them will be uncomfortable." He set down the cable. "But we'll have them. And after we rebuild whatever needs rebuilding." He picked up his coffee. "We've done that before." Dutch looked at him. "You're going to keep seeing them. The boy, Claire." It wasn't a question, and Gideon didn't treat it like one. "Yes." "She's okay with that." "She's getting okay with that," Gideon said, which was the accurate version, and accuracy mattered in this particular conversation. Dutch nodded. He turned the coffee mug in his hands. Outside, the November wind was doing its thing to the tree line, the ocean sound, the constant low note of the season. "He would have liked knowing it ended this way," Dutch said. "He built it to end this way." "Still," Dutch set down the mug. "He would have liked knowing." Gideon thought about a man at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a laptop and a legal pad, and the specific determination of someone who has decided that accountability is not the same as defeat. He thought about a compass with an engraving. He thought about a 4-year-old boy told to remember a word and trusting that the word would matter someday. "He knew," Gideon said. "When he put that compass in the coat, he knew." December arrived without ceremony and with a great deal of cold. Noah turned 11 in March, but the birthday that mattered was happening in December, which was not a birthday at all, but something that did not have a name. The first time Gideon brought him to the garage. It was a Saturday. Claire had agreed to it, and her agreement had been the kind that comes after genuine internal negotiation rather than politeness, which meant it meant something. She had said, "He can go. But you bring him back by 5, and if anything mechanical is going to be dangerous, you tell him it's dangerous before he touches it, not after." Gideon had said yes to both conditions without hesitation because they were reasonable conditions, and Claire Mercer's conditions were always reasonable, which was something he had come to understand as one of her defining characteristics. Noah sat on an upturned milk crate in the garage and watched Gideon work on a carburetor for 45 minutes without saying anything. He watched the way people watch things they are serious about learning, not with visible excitement, but with the particular stillness of someone taking inventory. His eyes tracked Gideon's hands. When Gideon set something down, Noah noted where it went, When Gideon picked something up, Noah noted which hand. You can ask, Gideon said. I know, Noah said. I'm watching first. Gideon looked at him. Dad said you should always watch before you ask, Noah said. He said most answers are in what you can already see if you look long enough. Gideon turned back to the carburetor. He said that a lot. Did he learn it from you, or did you learn it from him? The question was so direct that Gideon almost smiled. Bit of both, he said. He was better at the watching part. Did you tell him the same thing? Told him worse, Gideon said. He needed it worse. He was more impatient than you. Noah considered this with what appeared to be genuine surprise. The surprise of a child who has held a parent in a particular form for years and has just been handed a detail that doesn't fit the form and requires adjustment. He seemed patient, Noah said, in the stories. He got patient, Gideon said. He started impatient. Took him years. He looked at the carburetor. You started further along than he did. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, is that because of him or because of Mom? Both, Gideon said. And some of it is just you. The garage was warm, running the propane heater that Gideon kept low out of habit and had turned up today without thinking about it, which was its own kind of accommodation. Outside, the December wind moved through the tree line, and the sound of it came through the walls the way familiar sounds do, constant and ignorable. The Road King sat beside them in its specific state of ongoing attention, never finished, never broken, always somewhere between the two, which was the state of things that are loved and used simultaneously. Dutch came in at 2 with sandwiches he'd gotten from somewhere and set them on the far end of the workbench and went back out without interrupting the work. Which was exactly right, the precise social calibration that Dutch performed unconsciously, because he had been performing it for years in spaces where the work mattered more than the company, but the company also mattered, and the balance between them required a specific kind of respect. Noah ate his sandwich with one hand and examined a valve stem with the other, turning it in the light, and Gideon ate his sandwich and watched him and did not say what he was thinking, which was that Caleb had done exactly this particular posture, sandwich in one hand, part in the other, tilted toward the light. At 22 in a garage that no longer existed, and the repetition of it was not painful in the way Gideon had expected grief to operate when it arrived through a living person. It was something else, something that did not have a clean name, but sat in the chest without heaviness. Claire came to the garage for the first time in February. She did not come for herself. She came because the Civic had developed a new noise, this one from the front right wheel bearing, a low hum that built with speed. And Dutch had told her at some point during one of the increasingly frequent logistics conversations they had on the phone that wheel-bearing work was cleaner at the garage than in a parking lot. And she had said she would think about it, and she had thought about it for 2 weeks, and then she had driven over on a Tuesday afternoon when she was not working and the school day was not yet over. She parked the Civic in the bay and got out and stood in the garage and looked at it, at the tools, the workbenches, the photographs on the corkboard, the Road King in its corner, the smell of oil and cold metal and propane heat, the specific quality of a space that is used by people who take what they do seriously. Gideon was at the bench. He turned when she came in. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was looking at the corkboard. He let her look. He went back to what he was doing, which was cleaning a set of contacts that didn't need cleaning quite yet, but provided something to do with his hands. And she stood at the corkboard for maybe 3 minutes before she said quietly, "He looks young." He was young, Gideon said. We all were. She touched the edge of the photograph with one finger, the one where Caleb was laughing, the one with the summer light behind him, and the particular openness of a man who has not yet accumulated what he was about to accumulate. She touched the edge, not the photograph itself, the border, as though there were a protocol for the distance between her and that image that she was working out in real time. "He never brought me here," she said. "He kept things separate," Gideon said. "He thought it was protection. I know why he did it." She dropped her hand. "I understood why. I just didn't understand until recently that it wasn't working. That separation isn't the same as safety." She turned from the corkboard. "Can I watch?" "You can help," Gideon said. "If you want." She looked at him. "Wheel bearing straight forward," he said. "You've got steady hands. I can see that. You've got steady hands and you're patient. Watching is fine, but there's no reason to just watch if you want to do." She looked at the Civic. at the tools on the bench, at Gideon. Okay, she said. He walked her through it. She made one mistake, the same kind Noah had made with the gasket, a pressure mistake, applying force before alignment, and she caught it herself before he said anything and corrected it and moved on. And Gideon did not comment on that either, because commenting would make it a moment, and it was better as just a thing that happened, a thing that was learned and continued from. At 4:15, she had to leave to get Noah from school. She wiped her hands on a shop rag and looked at the Civic, wheel bearing replaced, front right no longer destined to hum. And her expression was the expression of a person who has done something with their hands that they did not know they could do. And that particular expression, on that particular face, in the propane-warm air of a December garage, was something Gideon would not try to describe later when Dutch asked him how it had gone. He would just say, "Fine." And Dutch would know what fine meant from the way he said it. Spring came slowly and then all at once, the way spring does in counties where winter is serious and stubborn and doesn't release its position without a fight. On a bright Saturday in April, the garage bay doors were open for the first time in months, and the air that came through them smelled like the specific combination of thaw and soil and something green that had been making its way up under the frost and had finally arrived. Gideon was outside with the Road King, running it slow through the lot, checking the throttle response after the carburetor work, listening to it the way you listen to something you know well when you're trying to hear whether it still sounds like itself. Noah was on the bench inside with a Sportster engine component that Dutch had deemed educational, a rocker arm assembly, disassembled, needing to go back together in the right sequence. The kind of puzzle that was not actually a puzzle once you understood the logic, but that required understanding the logic first, and understanding the logic required sitting with it in the specific discomfort of not knowing until you did. He had been sitting with it for 40 minutes. He would figure it out. Gideon was not concerned about that. He was concerned about the opposite, that he would figure it out too fast and miss the lesson that existed in the sitting with it, which was the lesson that mattered more than the assembly itself. 3 other kids were in the garage. This had not been planned. It had happened the way things happen in spaces that are alive and useful and known in a community. One kid had asked, through a third party, if they could see the bikes. And then another. And then a 14-year-old named Marcus, who had been quietly showing up at the outer edge of everything for 3 weeks, never asking, just proximate, in the way of someone who wants something they haven't yet decided they're allowed to want. Dutch had let them in. He hadn't made a ceremony of it. He'd just unlocked the side bay and said, "Don't touch anything without asking," and gone back to what he was doing, which was the right approach. The only approach that worked with kids who were trying to figure out whether a space was safe by whether it acted like safety was a performance. Marcus was the one who finally asked a question. He asked it quietly, standing beside Noah at the bench, looking at the disassembled rocker arm. "What's that for?" Noah looked at the component. "Controls the valves," he said. "Has to go back together in this specific sequence, or the timing's wrong and the engine doesn't run right." "How do you know the sequence?" "Working it out," Noah said. Marcus looked at the pieces. "Can I help?" Noah looked at him, then at the assembly, then back. "Yeah," he said. "Pull up a crate." Gideon, idling the Road King just inside the bay door, heard this. He listened to Noah explain the rocker arm logic to Marcus and the patient, accurate way of someone who has learned a thing well enough to teach it, not performing knowledge, just transferring it, one piece at a time. And he kept the engine at low idle and did not interrupt, because there are moments where the right thing to do is stay exactly where you are and let what is happening happen. Dutch appeared beside him. He had 2 coffees, both actually hot, which was unusual enough to be notable. He handed one across, and they stood together with the morning around them. The bay doors open, the spring air moving through, the sound of the engine, the sound of voices at the workbench, the sound of tools on metal, the specific alive sound of a garage doing what a garage is supposed to do. "She's coming by later," Dutch said. "I know." "She called you or she called me?" "She called you," Gideon said. "To bring food for the kids." Dutch sipped his coffee. "So she's bringing food for the kids?" "Yes." "And she called me specifically." "She knows you're easier to call," Gideon said. "I'm working on that." Dutch looked at him with the expression he used when he was not going to say the obvious thing, and both of them knew he was not going to say it. and that was its own form of the obvious thing being said. He drank his coffee. The Harley idled. At the bench, Noah and Marcus had figured out the first three components of the rocker arm sequence together and were working on the fourth, and the other two kids had drifted over and were watching in the same way Noah had watched the first day. First watch, then ask, then do. Gideon looked at his coffee. He thought about a gas station on Route 9 in November and a boy crossing a parking lot without hesitating. He thought about the night in the apartment and a compass on a kitchen table and 3 federal inboxes and a man driving west. He thought about 4 years of envelopes sent back because a woman needed the people who sent them to understand they were not yet square, and the particular form of honesty that was, fierce and uncompromising and ultimately right. He thought about a legal pad and block printing and a password given to a 4-year-old. I thought about what it meant to build something that outlasts the storm. He looked at the bench, at Noah, at Marcus beside him, at the 2 other kids watching, at Dutch with his coffee and his limp and his gray beard and his exact unchanging presence, which was its own form of the thing that was trying to happen here. He thought about later when Claire would pull up in the Civic with its good wheel bearing and get out with food for the kids, and Noah would look up from the bench and wave with a grease-covered hand, and she would stand in the bay door for a moment with the spring air behind her, and she would look at the garage, at the tools, at the kids, at the bench where her husband's photograph was pinned on the corkboard next to photographs of other men who had survived different things in different ways, and she would make a decision about whether the space was safe by whether it acted like safety was a performance, and it would not be a performance, and she would come in. He cut the Road King's engine. The sudden quiet was the kind that happens when something that has been running steadily for a long time stops. Not empty, but full, dense with the echo of what it held. The air still vibrating at a frequency too low to hear but present the way things are present when they matter. At the bench, Noah looked up. He looked at Gideon across the garage, across the space between the bay door and the workbench, and his face was the face of a boy who had grown up a degree or two in the last 5 months, not in the way that loss grows children up, the accelerated hollow kind, but in the way that guidance does, slower and with more texture, the kind of growing that leaves something behind in place of what it takes. Got it, Noah said. The rocker arm assembly was whole in his hands, correctly sequenced, ready. Yeah, Gideon said. Noah looked at the assembly, then at Marcus. Try it now, he said. Take it apart and put it back together yourself. It goes faster the second time. Marcus picked up the first component without hesitation. Gideon stood at the bay door with the spring air at his back and the garage in front of him and his coffee in his hand, and outside on the lot the Road King sat quiet under the April sky, chrome catching the morning light without apology, engine cooling in the particular way of a machine that has been run well and stopped cleanly and will run again when it's asked to. Dutch stood beside him. Caleb would have liked this, Dutch said. Gideon drank his coffee. Yeah, he said. He built toward it. The spring light moved across the garage floor in the slow way light moves when there is nothing chasing it. At the bench, the kids worked. Outside, Route 9 ran south through the county under the open American sky, past gas stations and school bus stops and apartment buildings and diners glowing pale gold in the early morning. And somewhere on that road or off it, the people who had been pointed at the Mercer family were dispersing into whatever came after the thing they had built was burned, scattered, reduced, facing a documentation so comprehensive that there was nowhere inside it to stand. And in a garage at the end of a gravel road, a boy put a machine back together correctly for the first time. He held it up to the light to check it. It was good. He set it down on his bench and looked at it for a moment with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has learned a thing that will stay learned. Not the performing of knowledge, not the relief of completion, but the settled, ordinary feeling of a person who has found what they are capable of and confirmed it, and will carry that confirmation forward into everything that comes after. Then he picked up the next component, and the work continued.